Yeah, so hi guys, and welcome to both a few of you on Zoom, but I'm very happy to see that we actually have a room full of people here as well who found their way to the IMC meeting room, which is now back in action and open for our Tuesday seminars and meetings and all the other stuff that used to define the Interacting Mind Center before the pandemic set in. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andreas Liebold. I'm an associate professor at the Danish School of Education and one of kind of the old farts at the IMC, along with Carsten and other people who've been here for a very long time. And I promised Andreas Røbstof, who couldn't be here today, to both say hi and kind of start the spring series of IMC talks with a bang, and also to introduce Tom, who is here visiting us, and maybe especially me for this semester. Actually, you've been here for what, 2 months, kind of formally?
Formally, I've been here for 2 months, yeah, but actually I've been here for 3 weeks in November and December.
Yeah. So, as you all know, the IMC has many different kind of sub-projects that we host or kind of consider parts of the family, and many different disciplines and a lot of different stuff going on. But one of the threads that has gone through all the work that we've been doing for many years has been interaction through play and games. That's something that's always been more or less present in our portfolio. And my own research interest has for a long time been learning through play, learning through games and gamification. And just when the pandemic hit, the first conference where I was actually kind of a formally invited fancy keynote speaker in Finland was cancelled and put on Zoom. And that was a gamification conference. But one good thing came out of that, because I met Tom there, on Zoom anyway, and he and I had a talk about kind of methods for studying how we should come up with better methods for understanding what really happens when we try to introduce extra play elements or extra game elements, or just inspiration from how computer games are usually designed into non-game context, which is usually what we call gamification. And at the IMC, we've kind of liked stuff like factorial experimental designs for a very long time, and it turns out that this is exactly what Tom has been doing. So he and I continued the conversation, and he's now here to work with us for a while on studies of gamification. I'm sure you can talk much more about your work, but I can just say that Tom Kratochvil is a PhD student from Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. He's a psychologist, both training to be a regular functioning psychologist and also doing his PhD in with a focus on gamification in work tasks, for instance. So some of the stuff that we're going to be hearing about is probably about creative tasks as well, as far as I remember, right? So some of the work that we've been doing around creativity maps very nicely onto what Tom has been doing with online gamification elements. So I'm very happy that you're here with us, and I'm very happy that we can actually now kind of get together again, so we can all get to know each other again, because I see a lot of new people as well. So I'm thinking that I'll just let you take over now, and then maybe when we're finished, and we're just going to hang out. Are we having sandwiches today? Yes, sandwiches are coming. Perfect. Then maybe we could just do a round, at least in the room, to just say hi to the new people that we might not know, because I think we'll need to do that a few times to kind of get the IMC back up running again. But yes, welcome Tom, both back physically to Denmark and as the inaugural speaker of the post-pandemic IMC Tuesday talks.
Nice. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Yeah. So hi again from me. My name is Kratochvil. You can call me Tom for short, because it's probably easier to pronounce. And the talk I'll be doing is about play at work, using game design to increase outcomes in school and work environment. But before I do that, I decided to say a bit about myself, although Andreas already did quite a good job of that. So if the presentation starts communicating with me, yeah, it does, great. So I've studied at Masaryk University. I'm a psychologist with a specialization in work psychology. I've done my master's there, and I'm currently a PhD student there. And I've actually done gamification research since my master's thesis. So I've been doing that for 3 years now because a PhD takes 4 years at Masaryk University. And apart from that, in my regular life, I'm an avid board gamer and video gamer. I also do cosplay, as you could have seen in the introduction to my talk on the internet. And I'm also an avid reader and a writer and translator, so I like stories. And that also actually connects to games because I'm translating video games novels and art books into Czech from English. So for example, World of Warcraft, Assassin's Creed and these things. And I'm also a solution-focused therapist, which is also important to this talk because as a solution-focused therapist, I'm focusing on positive psychology, so the resources you can have when you are trying to change something about yourself. So when I'm doing some kind of research, I usually tend to look into positive psychology constructs. They are kind of my thing. So I'll be talking about them too in this presentation. And I think that's quite enough about me, and I think it's time to get into the presentation itself. So I'm here to talk about gamification, and I think that a good thing to start with is to tell you actually what gamification is, because there might be someone who doesn't even know what it is or has only a vague idea. So we'll talk about that and have some examples of that and maybe even talk a bit about how it works. And then after that, I'll try to explain why we can use gamification at the workplace and in education and in what manner. That is, what outcomes we may aim for and what design could be useful in these contexts. And from that I will hopefully fluidly go to my own research about gamification in tertiary education and about the gamified goal-setting task. So that's the recent research I've done. It's 3 studies, and from that arises the need of the research I'll be doing currently and in the future. So I'll at least briefly try to say something about that too, so that you know what you might delve into with me if you want to. Okay, so what is gamification? Well, I think that maybe a good idea is to actually ask you, what do you think is a gamification? Have you encountered any gamification? Can you give us an example of where you've met?
Online courses, where they give you those badges and points.
Okay, so it can be badges and points in online courses. Okay, great. Any other example you might think of?
Leaderboards.
Yeah, some leaderboards. Sorry?
Oh, Duolingo.
Yeah, Duolingo is very much gamified. I'll actually use it as one of those examples. Yeah, so that's gamification. And why do you think it is a gamification? What does make it a gamification?
Because it uses the same kind of incentive structures as many games do.
Yeah, it uses some parts of games as incentives, as a structure. That's right. And actually the one definition that I'm usually using in my studies is that it is either spontaneous or intentional use and introduction of game design and content outside of games. So it can be, for example, at the workplace, in education, with mobile health apps and many other contexts, really. Marketing, for example. So why do we do that? Well, the reason for that usually is that there is some gap which we want to solve in the environment. For example, it might be quite easy for you to go for a run. Let's say that you know that it's good for you to go running once in a while, for example, once in a week. And it's quite easy to tell that to yourself and go running once. But to make it a habit, that's much more difficult. So the gap here might be making it a habit. And one way to do that would be, if we want to use gamification, that is, to use Zombies Run. I don't know if you've heard about that app, but Zombies Run is basically an app about running, which builds on a world where you are running from zombies. It's a post-apocalyptic story where you are trying to run from zombies. That's one thing, and you're also going on supply runs, and you are also trying to solve a story of how the zombies got into the world and how to cure the world. And you can also build your own base with the things you find along the way when you are running. So the way you can build your habit is actually through this story and through these objectives you can attain. So that's one example of gamification we may use. Getting closer to what I do, at the workplace we usually want to set difficult goals for people. But on the other hand, if we set difficult goals, they may seem a bit frightening to people. So how do we solve that with gamification? Well, let's put it into an example of onboarding. Usually when you are onboarding in a company, there's a lot of materials you have to go through, like an immense amount of materials, which can be quite frustrating and frightening to do. One thing we can do about that with gamification, we can divide, for example here, company and products policies into several parts, into levels, which you can go through, and you can attain points and see how well you are doing in comparison to other people, or how much of your induction, of your onboarding have you already done. So what this gamification does, it divides the huge difficult goal in several smaller goals, which makes it easier, and at the same time it gives you feedback on how you proceed. So it gives you a feeling of competence that you are doing it right. And in educational context, one thing which we've done and which I won't be talking about that much this talk, but it is one of studies we did at Masaryk University, was in the first wave of the pandemic in March 2020. We introduced the gamification when we had to move to distance learning, because it was quite easy to get students to come to the online seminars. That wasn't difficult. What was really difficult for us was to help them be proactive in those lectures and seminars. Usually they didn't want to speak that much, they usually didn't want to turn on their cameras, etc. So we were thinking, okay, what can we do about this? And we decided to implement a gamification design for this. And what we basically did was we introduced some badges, which stated if you react as the first person to a question from the teacher, you get a badge. If you react as the first one to the question of another student, you get a badge, and you get the idea. And it actually worked. We have found some significant difference in both the engagement of the students in the course and in their performance in the course regarding grade points. So that is another way of what we might do. However, I've just spoke a bit more generally and formally, so let's make it more specific. So what is actually the game design and content we may use? Well, we can divide it into several parts. There's usually some kind of elements and dynamics, how we interact with the elements, and then there's the context of the gamification. So for example, the elements we've talked about are badges regarding the students, points which we can attain in the onboarding, or story, which is also a part of game. Usually games have some kind of a story. So we might also use that. But there are of course many other elements we may use, but these are the ones in these examples. And the interactions with them are based on, first of all, achievements. If I get badges, if I get points, I achieve something. I get to know I'm competent, which satisfies my need of competence in the self-determination theory. So I'm more intrinsically motivated. I also have higher satisfaction of my socialization need if I'm competing with other players or users of the gamified system, or if I collaborate with them, or if I just share my experiences with them. And then there's the immersion aspect of the dynamics, which can be that you go through a story, that you immerse yourself in a story, or for example, that you build your own base, similar to building your house in The Sims, and these things. So that's the dynamics, and apart from both of these, there's the thing I haven't talked about that much, but is the context. For example, we may actually frame an activity which is not a game at all, for example, an intelligence test, as a game, just by saying this is a game, and try to see whether there's a difference. And that might actually work. There's research on that. Another thing we might change is not the framing itself, but the aesthetics. We can make the task you are doing more aesthetically similar to games. And similarly to that, we can also change the feedback of the system of the task you are doing more closer to games. For example, the sound of what is happening in the system may be more closer to games. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is what we build on. And just to briefly put it into a coherent example, if you look at Duolingo, which is a platform for learning languages, it actually has all of these. Because, for example, there are streaks which you have for completing a lesson each day, crowns for completing a level, and ramp-up tests where you get points for completing lessons really fast. And all of these show to you that you are achieving something, that you are competent. Together with the health, because you can lose health in Duolingo. And at the same time, if you lose all of your health for the day by making 5 mistakes, you can get it back by practicing. So once again, it makes you practice if you want to learn more and if you make mistakes. And the same thing goes for difficulty. So all of these help you realize that you are achieving something, that you're competent. Then there is the leaderboard, which is a weekly comparison of you and several other users of Duolingo. And your profile, where you can share your experiences in Duolingo with other people who you have as friends. And all of this, once again, connects to the socialization part of gamification and of relatedness on the self-determination theory. And the last part, which is important, is that there are listening exercises which have a story. So once again, you can go through a story. You can listen to some interesting thing happening to some people and immerse yourself in that. So all of this together actually uses all of the elements of gamification we may want to use. But on the other hand, it uses them together, so it's difficult to distinguish what actually works at that moment, and that's the thing I want to look into. Okay? Yeah?
Just a clarification question. I'm saving all the other questions for later. But the stories one, does that mean that you feel like you're participating in a story, like most games, as in the zombie one?
Not in this case. I think that Duolingo hasn't gotten there yet. I think they will, but currently the story is only that you fill in parts of the story. You can't make any decisions changing the story. That would be nice, and I think it will happen on Duolingo at one point, but not currently. So yeah, it is sort of a story, but it's not the same thing as usually is in games. On the other hand, there are some linear stories in games too, so it can still work as an immersion feature, though not as strong.
But I mean, when you do these tasks, not the stories, but the rest of the tasks, that's not part of a greater story.
No, there's no greater story to all of that.
Yeah.
The only greater story is that you can learn a language.
Yeah. Well, for example, the zombie game.
Sorry?
The zombie run thing. That seemed like it had.
Yeah. The zombies run is better in that sense, I think, because it has an overarching story that you actually complete some missions, and altogether you are trying to achieve a higher goal, sort of, because you are trying to resolve the situation of zombies being in the post-apocalyptic world. That's right.
And not just to get points.
And not just to get points, which is of course one of the downsides of Duolingo, because it doesn't have as much meaning as Zombies Run, at least according to me. And actually I'll be talking about that in one of my studies too. Okay, so that's about gamification generally. Briefly, gamification at the workplace and in education. So what are the common targets? Usually it is effectiveness. For example, you want people to perform better in the task they do, either at the workplace or even in a course. Or you want them to learn things better, to have a better retention of what they learned, for example. And that goes both, once again, for the employees, because there's employee development, and for students. So there's actually a similarity there too. So that's one thing you can target. You might want to increase that. Another thing which is probably quite closely connected to that is motivation. You might want people to be more active in some tasks, which usually should lead to them being more effective in those tasks. So you want to motivate them to do that. Another thing you might want to do is change some kind of an attitude or behavior. So for example, you might want to change an attitude towards some kind of work the people do, and once again that might change their effectiveness in that work. And last but not least, you can also try to change a boring activity to make it more fun. For example, the onboarding situation, which may be quite boring. So those are the targets that are usual with gamification at the workplace and in education. What we were particularly interested in is one, performance, and we defined that as the means to reach a goal within a task or a job in general, or a course at the university. So that was our first targeted outcome. And the other outcome you'll probably not be familiar with, but it is quite closely connected to what I just talked about. Let me just have a sip. It's called work engagement, and this construct is defined as a highly motivated persistent state which is related to work. So if you're energized, if you're immersed in your work, in the task you do, then you are engaged in those tasks psychologically, which also relates to being behaviorally engaged in them, of course, and to your motivation. So we were thinking, okay, if gamification is usually used to increase behavioral engagement, then logically it might make sense to look into whether it increases this psychological construct of work engagement. And just to make it more clear, these are some items from the questionnaire which is usually used for the work engagement. So at my work, school, in such tasks, I feel bursting with energy, so I'm energized. I'm enthusiastic about my job, etc. So I have some kind of enthusiasm when I'm doing it. And I'm also immersed in the work I do in the studies that I'm doing, which means that I actually pay attention to just, for example, my screen and writing my paper, not just to anything else around me. So I'm immersed, which quite closely, I think, connects to the immersion part of gamification. So I think the connection might really be established even there. And apart from all of that, as I've already said, we also wanted to look into various game design features. Because what Duolingo, for example, does is that it combines many, many features of games and just hopes for the best effect of that. But we don't really know what's the most beneficial change of the environment, what's the most beneficial game feature we may use in that particular context, or even in our context. So what we wanted to do is, okay, we want to establish that performance and work engagement are somehow connected to gamification, but under what circumstances? So that's what we did. So the first part of what I actually did in the first study was that I established this relationship, and later on I continued with the use of various game design features. Okay, so let's head to the first study. The first study we did was a gamification of 4 university courses. And our research question was, does achievement-based gamification increase performance and work engagement in college courses? So what we actually did, we gave out badges to the students for their graphics of their presentations, for early submissions of some work they did, and for attendance at the lectures and at the seminars, etc. And we were hoping and hypothesizing that this would change their engagement in the course, the work engagement, and their performance. And why we used so many courses? Well, the courses at our faculty are quite small, so we weren't able to use one course which we would divide into 2 groups and compare the 2 groups at 1 year. So we needed to do that across several courses and across several years to get a large enough sample. So in the end, we've ended up with this kind of sample, which is altogether something around 250 people, maybe even 300. And we were interested in whether there is a general effect of change in performance with the gamification which we used, which was almost all the same across all the courses. So no major differences there. So what we actually measured and how? First of all, we manipulated the situation. We either used the gamified design of the course or not. We also measured how often did the students access the gamified system, because there was a system with the badges and the challenges that students could complete. So we were interested in how often they go there. And then work engagement and course performance, which was measured as grade points. And we did a multi-level linear regression on that and a multi-level mediation on that, because we had so many groups, so we decided to use a multi-level approach. And what have we found out? Well, our hypotheses were supported, because we actually found a general effect of the condition on performance. It was quite weak actually, but there was a significant difference between those courses that were gamified and those that were not. And we also found a mediation effect which we supposed, and that is that those students who went more often into the gamification system were then engaged more in the course itself, psychologically, and based on that, their performance increased. So the mediation was also supported. All of this brings us to the conclusion that yeah, it does make sense to measure work engagement in educational and work context. So we use this study to establish the effect and continued with what I just talked about. So study 2 was a gamified goal-setting experiment, which was actually a replication of the work of Dr. Landers from the United States and his team. And apart from being a replication, it was also extension of his work. Their research question was, do leaderboards increase performance in a short-term brainstorming task? And we extended that with, and do they also increase the work engagement in this task? So what they and us did was that we actually created a design where people either had a leaderboard in a brainstorming task or they had some sort of a goal. So for example, the basic goal, the do your best goal, was try to list as many uses for a knife as you can think of, and separate the ideas by commas. So we were actually interested in how many uses of a knife they can come up with, and in the do your best condition, we just given them an abstract goal, do your best. In the leaderboard condition, they had a leaderboard of other players who were fictitious. These players were actually based on the other goals. So this is actually the goal of 15 uses, and this is goal of 39 uses, and for 53 uses. So we used the goals in the other conditions as parts of the leaderboard, and we were interested in whether the objective performance, the uses they come up with, somehow differ in these 5 conditions. So what we exactly did is that we conveniently collected 320 participants, so 54 participants per group, and we manipulated the task. We measured their work engagement, task-specific work engagement, and their task performance, and also self-reported performance. That is, we asked one question about how they view their own performance, which is something that the lenders didn't do. And once again, we did an ANOVA and a mediation. Why a mediation? Because we hypothesized that actually if the leaderboard changes your task performance and you can see how you perform on the leaderboard because you know how many uses you wrote, then logically your task performance should affect how you view your own performance. So we expected that actually task performance mediates the effect of the leaderboard on the self-reported performance, apart from the effect on work engagement, which is there too on the downside. So what we found, well, first of all, we replicated what lenders et al. Have found out. That is that there is actually a significant difference in the objective performance, in the task performance. And the difference is such that those in the leaderboard condition have a similar performance to those in the difficult and impossible goal condition. And all 3 of these have higher performance than those in the do your best and easy condition, so they outperform them. So we supported their finding with our check sample. So this was actually supported. Continuing with the work engagement, we found only one significant difference, and that was between the leaderboard and difficult condition, which is sort of strange, because if you look into it, well, there is a difference in the performance between the do your best and easy condition and the other conditions, and now we found a difference in the work engagement in a completely another condition. So we were thinking, okay, this is strange. How could it happen? And actually, what we think and test it later is that it might be a relic of using the leaderboard. If we used another feature from games, maybe it would be different. That's one thing. And also the effect was quite small, as you can see. and it was small across all conditions. So maybe if we had larger sample, or maybe if we used something more meaningful as a gamification, because once again, similarly to Duolingo, this is only points. This doesn't give you any meaning, any story, overarching story, or anything. So maybe the effect is just too small in the other conditions, and here for some reason it appeared the largest. But either way, we found some support for the effect on work engagement. And regarding self-reported performance, this is where it actually gets interesting. Because what we found is that there is an indirect effect via task performance on the self-reported performance, and it's positive in the leaderboard condition when compared to the do your best and easy condition. And simultaneously, there are also some direct effects, which is really interesting, because one of them is that the leaderboard is directly and positively affecting the performance, the self-reported performance in comparison to the impossible condition. And what is even more interesting, what I will talk about some more, is the difference between the leaderboard and the easy condition, where there is a negative effect. So that actually means that the leaderboard decreased how you view your own performance in the task, if you take the task performance into account, that is. So why did this happen? Well, we were thinking maybe this is something to do with the satisfaction of the people, because if you see a leaderboard and you are not the highest person on the leaderboard, maybe it makes you less satisfied with the task performance you have, and maybe that is the reason why there is a direct negative effect in comparison to the easy condition, which is actually quite easy to complete because it's only 15 uses. So maybe that's the reason. So building on this mediation and the direct effect we found, and on the fact that the work engagement only changed in comparison to the difficult condition, we went ahead with a third study, which was similar to this one, where we wanted to test whether this somehow differs if we use another type of gamification. So what we actually did is that we used two kinds of gamified design. The first one was cooperative, the other one was a leaderboard, which we've just seen. And our research question this time was, do various gamification designs change performance and engagement differently? So the design we used this time was that we created once again the control condition, which was exactly the same as in the previous study. Then there was the leaderboard, which is once again the same, but there is a slight change I'll talk about later. And apart from that, there was also a cooperative condition. And in the cooperative condition, the participants were told that they are playing with other people together in a team and trying to surpass some levels. And these levels actually were the same goals as in the leaderboard condition. So this level 1 actually was the same thing as beating the player which had the lowest score of 105. And apart from all of this, we also added hints. Every time you either in the leaderboard condition beat someone on the leaderboard and move up on the leaderboard, or rather in this case move down on the leaderboard, and every time you progress to the next level, you get a hint, which is a use you can use in the task. So for example, you could use a knife for painting with it. So that was one of the hints you got. Yeah.
That's different from how leaderboards work in games, right? That's not like what you, or I just thought it feels like completing a level and that being better than something.
Well, I think that there are some games where you, by being somewhere higher in a competitive design, you get more rewards. For example, in MOBA games, I think if you are one of the people who were the best in the game, you can get more rewards from more gold and more items, I think, in MOBA games. So yeah, actually, it's not as common, I think, but it can happen that if you are the best in a competitive setting in the leaderboard, sort of, then you get the most, or that you get something that helps you in the game later.
And here you do another round then, and then you can use the hint right away, right?
Yeah, you can use the hint right away. That's right. And apart from these actual hints, we also used sort of absurd hints, which are nonsensical. It's things the participants in study 2 wrote. So for example, it's cutting taxes, so you could use a knife to cut your taxes, or to cut a dense atmosphere in the room, and these things. And these appear randomly. And so why we did that, why we use these absurd hints and useful hints? Well, the useful hints should put more meaning to the leaderboard and the levels. So that was the reasoning behind that. And regarding the absurd hints, previous studies have shown that if people watch a comedy, for example, before completing a creative task, instead of watching a drama, then they are more creative in the task and they actually are more engaged in the task.
Why?
Well, the logic these studies have behind it is that actually because you are entertained in a funny way, you tend to be more original. I'm not really sure whether that's the correct explanation, but it's the only they give. So and then the effect is really there. So we actually used to.
It's robust. The effect.
Sorry.
There are quite a few studies showing that positive emotion in general leads to better performance on divergent thinking.
Yeah, maybe the thing behind that is actually not connected to the fun itself, but to the fact that if you are watching a drama, usually there's much more of feelings of sadness in the movie and of traumatic experiences between the people and stress and these things. So maybe you are more
Careful. You're more careful instead of exploring.
Yeah, you tend to be more conservative than divergent, and that is why you are not as original and as performing in the creative tasks. So that's probably the better logic behind that. Then it's fun. Yeah. So that's what we did this time, hoping that these hints would help us find an effect on work engagement. And so what we measured this time was actually, once again, the work engagement. We also manipulated the condition, and we measured both of the performances as in the previous study. And apart from all of that, based on the previous result, we also decided to measure task satisfaction, how satisfied the people were with the task. And so what the model this time looks like is this. So the condition should create larger task performance, the gamified condition, either of them. Based on that, your task satisfaction should increase, but probably more for the cooperative condition and the competitive condition, based on what we found in study 2. And based on that, your self-reported performance should be high. So this was what we hypothesized and what we found out. First of all, we did find an effect for the objective performance. It was significant and it was, let's say, moderate. And what we found out is actually that both of the gamified conditions led to higher objective performance than the control condition. They did not differ to one another. Both the people in the leaderboard condition and the cooperative condition had a similar performance, but they both differed from the control condition. Quite interestingly, if we look into self-reported performance, there's a major difference. Those in cooperative condition, which are on the right, have much larger self-reported performance, so they viewed their own performance much better than those in competitive and control condition, which viewed their performance quite similarly. Yeah? Who viewed their performance quite similarly?
And is this like controlling for the actual performance, or did
No, this is only and I don't know, without taking the actual performance into account yet. I'll get to that later. So this is regardless of task performance.
So the leaderboard people seem to not know that they are better.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting.
Yeah. And sad.
And sad, exactly. But it's one of the things that would lead you to, well, maybe leaderboards then aren't the best practice. Because if the people don't know that they are that good, then maybe using a leaderboard is not the best way to help them.
Yeah.
Because of the competence need in self-determination theory. And if we take the task performance into account, there is still an effect on the self-reported performance. It's positive in both cooperative and competitive condition. So your performance, you would view your performance as higher even if you had a leaderboard, both if you had a leaderboard and if you had a collaborative task in comparison to the control condition. Quite interestingly, this time there's also a positive direct effect of the cooperative condition in comparison to the control condition. So that might actually explain what is happening here. The reason why those in the cooperative condition are higher, because the indirect effects are quite similar, is the direct effect. So something is happening with those cooperating people that helps them view themselves as better performing, which doesn't happen with the competing people.
Yeah.
So either way, we found support for this mediation and continued on. And this time, looking into work engagement, we found the difference between the control and the cooperative condition. So maybe the explanation for what is happening with the cooperating people might actually lie in the work engagement, because the only difference was between those two conditions, not between the control and the competitive condition. So that might be one of the explanations, that there is this effect. The other explanation might lie here, which would make sense based on the previous study I've just talked about on the previous slide. So we continued with looking into task satisfaction. And this is an interesting finding, once again, because it corresponds with the previous study. What we found, that the indirect effect via both task performance and task satisfaction was significant and positive for both types of the gamified design, and the effects were quite similar, as you can see. But what is happening and what is significant and negative is once again the effect of the competitive condition in comparison to control. So even if we take task satisfaction into account, there is still a negative effect at play with the competitive condition in comparison to the control condition. So once again we thought, okay, why is that? We thought that the task satisfaction would explain that, what is happening here. And we've come up with several thoughts of what it could mean, and those are the future venues of the research. So the first thought that occurred to us, okay, maybe it's related to the relation between stress and satisfaction, because previous research actually shows that if you are that the stress actually has a positive effect on satisfaction because it decreases mundanity of a task. It makes them less boring. But on the other hand, if the stress has some kind of a negative effect on your health or on your well-being at all, then it actually lowers your satisfaction. So maybe the relationship is actually more complex here, and in the beginning, the competitive condition could, based on the stress induced, increase your performance, but because the task took some time, maybe what happened is that actually with some time the stress became negative, a negative effect, which would then lower your task satisfaction, and which would then explain what was happening here. So one explanation, one thing to look into would be to look into stress. And the other thing we might want to look into, and which might explain this, is based on social interdependency theory. And this theory states that if you are collaborating with other people, you are positively dependent on them, which means for your self-esteem, that your self-esteem is based rather on self-acceptance, that you accept yourself, and not on conditional acceptance. While in comparison, those who compete with other people, so they have a negative dependency on other people, actually base their self-esteem more on the conditional sense of self-esteem. So they're on the conditional acceptance, which would then mean that if you are competing, then you are more looking into meeting standards and meeting goals other people set for you, instead of basing it on your own, on yourself, how you view yourself generally. So actually using a competitive design might not be a good idea, in the relation to self-esteem. So another venue to take from here would be to measure self-esteem with such designs.
So people don't like to play chess if they're not good at it. That hurts.
But either way, we found support for the whole sequential mediation model. So there's that, and we found full support for the study. So the current venues are, for one, as I've said, just looking into stress in the task. So maybe what we could do is do exactly the same thing as I've just described in the study 3, and just add a measure of stress. And for example, even food choice, because your food choice should change based on how stressed you are. So use a measure of stress based on a questionnaire and on your food choice. Mm-hmm.
Is stress one thing or many things?
Well, that depends. That's quite a difficult question, I think. But
here it would be kind of state-based stress, right?
Yeah, state-based stress.
But still, is stress from not being the best the same as stress from the task being good?
I think that what we're gonna do, because that's actually what we are planning to do with Janice right now, is we're just gonna measure general stress. Whatever that is, yeah, exactly. And if we find a difference, then we can, of course, continue and try to find where exactly lies the difference in stress. Because the difficulty with gamified designs usually is, okay, we first need to establish what kind of game features we want to use, and then we also need to establish what are the constructs that we can actually look into with these designs, or the other way. So either we need to first think of the constructs and say to ourselves, okay, that means that we need to use this design and think about it this way, etc., etc. And it's quite difficult to combine these two together, because you have to design a research and design a gamification at the same time. Yeah, Andreas?
Yeah. Is this a good time for questions about this, or should we wait until you're finished?
Oh, it will take probably 1 minute to finish, so I think...
Okay, in that case I have a question after.
Okay, so this is the first thing we're thinking about. The second thing we are thinking about currently is whether actually the hints and the cooperation change performance due to some sort of behavioral engagement with the gamification itself. So what does this mean? If you are doing the task with the brainstorming and the knives, does it somehow change whether you look on the leaderboard or on the levels and on the hints and the absurd hints? Does that somehow change in comparison to being in the control condition, where you only can look at the uses you've just listed, the number of uses you've just listed? Does that somehow change? So what we actually would like to do is to use eye tracking with the condition where you would have the control condition with random hints, then the cooperative condition without hints, and the cooperative condition with hints, and to see whether these 4 conditions somehow differ in what is happening with the behavioral engagement, with the gamification itself, and with the performance in the task. So these are the current things we would like to do. I have one last slide about future venues. So I'll just briefly tell you what we are planning with my supervisor in the Czech Republic. And that is that we're going to look into another positive psychology construct similar to work engagement, because it's closely related to it, and that's psychological detachment from work. This means this is a state when you are not actually dealing physically nor mentally with your work during your breaks and during your free time. This is an important state because it actually helps you increase your mental health and well-being, and diminishes negative stress effects, and increases your performance actually even at the company, because it enables you to recover from the work after it. So we are thinking that there might be a way to actually intervene to increase psychological detachment with a gamified intervention, because what we did in the previous studies is a goal-setting experiment. And one of the ways how to increase psychological detachment is to do some kind of goal setting. Set your goals to about how you will spend your free time, whether you will use ICT technologies after work for work purposes and these things. So we are actually interested in whether we might gamify such a goal setting. And that would actually help us also probably because of the fact that when we are trying to increase psychological detachment, one thing that might actually help is actually playing video games. And if we gamify something that we are using as an intervention, then logically, if it is closer to games which themselves help detachment, maybe the effect could be larger. So one thing we could, for example, do is that we would actually tell people on the breaks to play Beat Saber against one another, to have a leaderboard in the office and try to compete or work together to some common goals. And after work, once again, we could, for example, create an application which would help them create some goals for their leisure time. So that's finally everything from me. Thank you for your attention and thank you for playing.